Okay, good morning everybody. Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai ki te hui o te komiti oranga hapori oranga taiao I tēnei rā. Welcome everyone to today's meeting of the Connected Communities Climate and Resilience Committee, the first meeting of this committee for the triennium, and it is a new committee as well, so welcome. Our emergencies procedures are up there on the screen. Can I please ask that all mobile phones are switched to silent? And in the event of emergency, please follow the instructions of our very capable staff. And we'll move on to our karakia timatanga, which is here on the screen. Please feel to join in me karakia tātou. Tuia te mana aki aki, rārangahia te mana rangatira, kia tipu, kia puawai, e ripu ngā wai o te awa kairangi, he kaitiaki ki te whenua, he oranga taiao, he oranga tangata, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. Okay, moving on to apologies. We have no apologies received, but noting that Councillor Ravi was intending to join us via Zoom, so I'll move an apology for lateness and hopefully she will join us. So I will move that an apology for lateness be received from Councillor Ravi. Mawai e tautoko, do I have a seconder please? Thank you, Councillor Parkin. I will now put the motion which has been moved and seconded. All those in favour please say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. I declare that motion carried. Okay, moving into public comment. We have a couple of speakers for us today. They're both speaking to the assets review update, although on different topics. So I will first invite Alan Brown from the Rotary Club of Hutt City, who as noted is speaking to item 6, the assets review update. Welcome, Alan. You have 3 minutes to address councillors. And if there is time, we will ask you a quick few questions. It's the button on the right to turn on your microphone. Kia ora.
Thank you. This morning you're here to decide the future of the Gibbs Watson Pavilion, amongst other things. And you have a motion on the floor to demolish that. We have been working with Council and Victoria University of Wellington to produce a repurposing plan, which is the first slide of which you see up there of the presentation we made to Council in September of this year. You'll see from that that we planned to remove the glass, put a new fabric roof on it and make it available as a public space, and that Rotary would fund that upgrade, putting seating inside of it, allowing it to be used as a public space, except when we choose to have it rented out for specific events such as wedding ceremonies, markets, gigs and the like. That proposal has been, you'll see in the papers, has been deemed unviable by council officers. We disagree, and I want to give you 3 reasons this morning why I think that is not the right decision. The most pushback we've had has been that council clearly want to reduce their costs, and we applaud your efforts in that regard. And they wanted to do this by transferring the ownership of the structure to us. Regrettably, under law in New Zealand, you can't sell a building without selling the land as well. And I'm pretty certain that you didn't want to sell us or give us the land. And so we have looked at the alternatives, which are, it can be leased or it can be licensed. We proposed a license, a non-exclusive license, which would allow it to be used by the public whenever we do, and we have a 10-year license period in mind. So the effective ownership can be transferred by that mechanism, and the ongoing costs that are of concern to council can be negotiated as part of the license agreement. We don't know what those are, but that is something that can be worked through. The second point that we want to make is that the cost of demolition, should you choose to do that, would be much higher than the costs of accepting our proposal. Knocking down the whole building, taking all those materials to dump, is not really the green proposal that we are looking for in the future. Our proposal takes down the glass and the aluminium and recycles these materials and retains the rest. If you knock it down, you have to reinstate that space, and that will come at a considerable cost. And so if you choose demolition, you're actually choosing a higher cost option than what we have in front of you. The third proposition is that this is a heritage listed location. And this building was actually built by Ian Athfield, or designed by Ian Athfield, when he was 26 years old, one of the first buildings. And it is an interesting and rare aesthetic because it complements the modern movement structures that this whole civic complex has. And so in the conservation plan that you have, it's listed as one of the few highly significant buildings in this. Let me just read it quickly. Has a high degree of significance in a landscape of national significance. And so if you choose to demolish it, you're actually going to have a fight with Heritage New Zealand. Our proposal we've taken it to Heritage New Zealand, and they have given us a letter of support. And so you can avoid that and any possible public backlash that might happen if you do that. So what we are saying today is that we still think negotiation of a proposal for us to continue along the lines that we have could be undertaken. And we recognise your need, and we have the same, to get this cleared up as soon as possible, and saying, let's wait give us till the end of May to negotiate with council to see whether we can come up with a plan that meets both parties. And in the event that that is unachievable, you can proceed to demolish automatically.
Thank you, Alan. I will allow a couple of quick questions because I think this is important, but if I could just kick off with one, because I think that one of the really important issues here is that question of ownership. We've had differing opinions from our officers, and I'll ask them to speak to it when we get to the paper. Assuming, though, that ownership could be transferred to your Rotary Group, are you willing to take on ownership and all the costs of that structure?
That is what the negotiation period would be about. It has to be acceptable to both parties, and we're certain that that can happen in time.
So in principle, yes? In principle, you are willing to take on ownership of that structure?
We don't think you can transfer ownership.
I know you don't.
We're prepared to be a party to a licence. That is what we have proposed.
Thank you, but
the difference between that.
Can I ask you a very simple yes or no question? Is your Rotary Group willing to take on ownership of that structure?
The answer is yes.
Thank you. Now, I saw Councillor Brown's hand, and there was one on this side.
Thank you, Chair. My question is similar. As you know, Alan, we are going through a large asset management plan, which there are hundreds on the list, and a lot of them are of very poor quality. This one, the brief is clear that they can be divested on reserve land, or the management plan wouldn't be happening. But this one now's been 2.5 years. The first step of it was 6 months. And what is the sticking point is the ownership. So I think that needs to be quite clarified today. We're now another 2 years down the track. And what I ask you is, if it could be done, why hasn't it been done already?
So we put our proposal in September of last year, and we received the response that it was not viable. We have been seeking a review of that decision since then, but that has not been achieved. We have been willing and able to attend that at any time.
Councillor Shaw has a question as well.
Thank you, Alan, for coming in. I applaud your passion for this particular project. My question to you is, there's a significant amount of money involved here. And so how do Rotary propose to raise that money, and how confident are you in doing so?
Look, we have that money available.
Okay, thank you.
Admittedly, it's tied up in trusts at the moment. There will be a little bit of process to do it. But the viability issue is one for us to consider, and that is what we need to do. But until such time as we get agreements to consider this in detail, we haven't done that step.
Thank you, Alan, for coming in today again, and thank you for all the great work that has been done on this project already. It was really interesting to come and see the ideas that had come out of Victoria University students, so thank you for joining us today. And I'll invite our next speaker, James Scott, who is speaking on the same agenda item. Kia ora, James. You have 3 minutes to speak. It's the button on the right-hand side there to turn the microphone on, and if there's time, we'll take a couple of quick questions from our members as well. Kia ora.
Councillor Mitchell, thank you. I believe the microphone's already on. Councillor Mitchell, committee members, I'm James Scott, President of the Belmont Residents Association, and I'm speaking on behalf of the local community. We oppose the proposed demolition of the Hardwick Smith Lounge. The lounge was built over 40 years ago, primarily with funds donated from a local family, the Hardwick Smith family. And it was after that gifted to the council to manage and maintain. And this is not just a building, it's a community asset with a history and identity. The current situation is the building's closed because of water ingress and mould that got into the building. And the condition is the result of lack of long-term maintenance and things. It's not just a building, it's a community asset, and we would like it back. It has a history and identity in the building. The community has a continued interest in seeing it restored and used, and I get that message over and over again. Noting the council position that there is no funding available to restore it and maintain it, and they're looking to divest it, and that there's not likely to be any funding in the medium term. And having read the Setting Our Sails report, that much is obvious that this is very much at the bottom of the agenda for the council. The council already has a built premises there, the Memorial Hall, that they maintain and look after. And so keeping this building would fall back to the community if it's needed. We've, for the last 2 years, been looking to try and regain ownership of the building so that we can restore it and repair it. There's been some discussions with council. They have been somewhat slow, but there was no indication that demolition was imminent or that there was any kind of time limit on that discussion. And so it came as somewhat of a surprise to see it appear in the papers of this committee meeting that demolition was proposed and imminent. And so I think we need to move on from that. We have an ability to act. I, 2 years ago, formed a working group of people who were interested in restoring and getting the building back together. We've looked at it, we've had permission to inspect it, take off some of the lining, see how much damage is done. Some of the team have been very keen to get in and start doing the work. We've not been able to because we had no authority to act as not having ownership or control of the building. But if the building is given back to us, we have people who have the skills and capability to get in and start restoring it. And I think in terms of a moral responsibility, while the council legally owns the building, because the building was built by the community and gifted to the council, council has a moral duty to consider all avenues before taking actions like demolition that can't be reversed. And the duty would be to offer it back to the community for their consideration and perhaps restoration. So what are we asking for? We're asking you to defer the demolition decision, direct officers to work with myself and the community to transfer ownership back to us and organise some kind of long-term lease on the land it sits on to enable us to restore and get it back into public use. There is a demand for it. We want to see it. It has a history. So this is an opportunity to remove that cost burden from the council, put it back to the community. There's a community willing to act and do these actions and work in partnership with us.
Thank you, James. Thank you. Any quick questions? Councillor Parkin, Councillor Dyer.
Kia ora, James. Obviously, one of the challenges for council is getting things actually going and having things happen in a timeframe. You've already alluded to the fact that you weren't given a timeframe for demolition needing to be come
No.
back to, and when you found out that it was coming to this committee, it was a surprise. What is the timeframe that you see that you need to be able to finish those negotiations, or actually have those negotiations with officers?
Well, I don't know. 31st of March would be a good date. I don't see any problem with doing it. I mean, it was transferred to the council on the basis of an agreement drawn up here in 1984, about 4 or 5 pages. 4 or 5 pages of legal document will get it back into our hands.
Thank you, Councillor Dyer.
I love the optimism. Just a quick question. You mentioned the Memorial Hall. I'm just wondering, do you think there is a need to have 2 public halls so close by?
Yes. As a community association, we are generally unable to book the Memorial Hall for our own functions, the Belmont Association, because it's so continually used. Talking with the Kelson Community Association, they are constantly getting requests for halls, for places. They've got to turn a lot of them away. The booking woman who runs the bookings there said she would love to have a second building in the vicinity she could direct people to. It's not a facility, as is the Memorial Hall, for the Belmont residents. It's a facility for the whole of the Hutt Valley and even wider. People from all over use those facilities. They're in great demand everywhere.
Thank you, James. Councillor Brown, you looked urgently like you had one
thank you,
last
Ja-
question.
Yeah. James, are you saying that you're willing for it to be divested to you?
Yes, we have been working for 2 years to get the building given back to us so that we can repair it, recognising that council are not in a position to do so.
Thank you very much, James. Thanks for coming in today. And again, thank you for yours and your community's interest in this facility and doing what you can to retain it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I look forward to hearing the results.
Could I just ask you that you turn that microphone off? Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of public comment. We'll move on to conflict of interest declarations. I call on members to declare any conflicts of interest they may have in relation to any items on today's agenda. Are there any conflicts? Councillor Parkin first.
Kia ora. I have an interest in the hall in Belmont. I'm on that working group, but it's not a conflict. There's no financial issue there.
Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, I have a conflict of interest to do with Hardwick Smith Lounge in that I've also participated in the working group, and a conflict with the buildings in the Civic Square there, as the Rotary Club I'm president of has been involved in those discussions. But I've sort of weighed it up in my mind, and the conflict is such that I'd like to take part in the discussion, but I won't vote.
I think given that any decision doesn't affect your Rotary group, I'm sure that you're able to vote if you wanted to, but maybe something to think about before we get there. All right, thank you very much. Oh, sorry, more conflicts. Te awa, kia ora.
Kia ora. Yeah, just to declare that I'm a uri or member of the trust that owns Honiana Te Puni Reserve.
Do the rounds. I've got a conflict of interest with the assets review paper in public excluded, which I'll talk about more in public excluded.
Okay, any final declarations? It's okay to share a surname. We'll move on to item 5 on our agenda, which is Nuku Ora Regional Spaces and Places Strategy 2025. The paper is on page 10 of your agenda. I'll ask Adrian Moore, our Head of Connected Communities, Marcus Sherwood, who is Nuku Ora's General Manager for Delivery, to speak to the item. And I will just note too, we have Xanta Jones from Sport New Zealand, who is joining us online, may be able to help out with some of the questions. But we'll give it to you, Adrian, to take away. Kia ora.
E rau rangatira, tēnei te mihi atu ki a koutou katoa I tēnei ata. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and speak with you today about Nuku'ota's regional places and spaces strategy. So I'll take the paper as read, but would like to make a few opening remarks and then open the conversation up for any questions with the committee afterwards. But before I get into the kōrero, I just take the opportunity to introduce Marcus Sherwood from Nuku'ota. Marcus, hei a koe.
Ko Rakutapu Tumonga, ko Tapawai Te Awa, ko Hokianga Te Moana, ko Ngātou ki Ngāta Whaoroa Te Waka, ko Ngāpui Te Iwi, ko Marcus Sherwood. So kia ora. I think I know a lot of people in this room, having previously been a staff member here at Hutt City Council, so it's lovely to be back here into this space, and thank you for having us here. My role is General Manager of the Delivery Team at Nuku'ota, which is a regional sports trust. And I do note in the paper that it talks about Nuku'ota's strategy. Just want to clarify that this is a regional strategy, Wellington Regional Strategy, that was developed by the Wellington Regional Steering Group, which is representatives of all councils on that. So this is something that has been put together for the sector and as a request of councils to help some of that sort of decision making around where people invest, because we all know that the time and cost of facilities is a huge expense, and that we need to be efficient in how we deliver those. So kia ora. And I will just pass to Zanta to introduce herself online.
Thank you, Marcus. Kia ora koutou, ko Zanta Jones, toko ingoa. I'm Spaces and Places Consultant at Sport New Zealand, and part of my role is supporting the Regional Sports Trust and their partners in the development and implementation of these regional spaces and places strategies that are around the country. Thank you for having us today.
Kia ora kōrua, thank you both. So this report seeks this committee's endorsement to the Wellington Regional Spaces and Places Strategy. Thank you for the correction there, Marcus, but we are recommending 2 caveats in making that endorsing decision. The strategy itself provides a regionally aligned framework for how councils can invest in recreational and sports facilities. From an officer's point of view, this regional places and spaces strategy, sorry, I don't know why I'm struggling to say that this morning, it's timely. I mean, we have a large population and it is growing. Our population is set to grow by more than 40,000 people over the next 30 years. We have a city that is becoming more diverse. We have an ageing population, increasingly ageing population group, and the way that we participate in recreational and sports activities is changing from traditional structures. We've also got climate change affecting the availability and the use of many of, particularly our outside or outdoor sports and recreation facilities. But we think that there's a strong alignment between what the strategy is proposing and the actions that council's already taking, particularly against things like making better use of those sports assets, those sports facilities. We think strongly already aligns with the approach and the direction that we're taking around our asset review program. There's a recognition of the effects of climate change on rec and sports in the city, and we think that aligns pretty closely with the direction that we're taking around things like our climate pathway, the investment that we're making in the drainage of our sports fields. And lastly, there's a clear equity lens posted throughout the strategy, which we think aligns with the approach that we're taking, not only in our rec, sports and play, and our sports policy approach, but actually also in the approach that we take to community facilitation and giving emphasis particularly to those communities and neighbourhoods of interest across our city. So whilst this strategy provides a decision-making framework, it's important to note that council still retains its legal responsibilities. And this strategy would not necessarily get in front of those legal responsibilities. But having said that, we would, in making this endorsing recommendation to you, suggest or propose that those endorsements are subject to 2 caveats. The first is around that decision-making framework and just ensuring there's clarity that Hutt City Council retains its self-determination in terms of the investments that it makes and the decisions that it makes around its access to recreation and sports facilities. The second caveat is that we don't support at this time the strategy's proposal to invest in a regional stadium in Porirua. The reason being that in our current fiscal environment, particularly with the work that we have underway around affordability and living within our means, the council investment in a facility outside of our jurisdiction just doesn't fit with our priorities at this time. And we think that an investment of that nature should sit with the territorial authority within which that facility sits. So we think an endorsement at this time would signal council's, I suppose, support for the strategy and support for the approach around regional collaboration in line with the direction of travel around amalgamation. But at the same time, it still, with those two caveats, shows council's, I suppose, preference for retaining its self-determination. All I wanted to say at this point. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Marcus?
No, but just around the decision-making framework that's in there, it is intended as an advisory resource, so it's a tool for councils to be able to get independent advice, see how it fits within the regional structure and how it fits within that. It's not expected to take away the decision-making of the funders or the owners of those facilities, but it's to provide independent advice as in how it fits within the sector. We've certainly applauded the work of council and their commitment towards upgrading facilities. So our both this strategy and previous work we've done has really emphasised the need to improve current assets rather than build new. So we look, and in this we've included stuff around non-capital works as well. So how facilities are managed, how they're co-used and that sort of stuff before proceeding to even thinking about building anything new. So definitely reuse, getting the best use out of what we've got, whether that be in a non-capital way or an improvement way. But we applaud the work that council's been doing to improve the drainage and facilities around the parks over the last few years.
Thank you, Marcus. Santa, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Sorry, I have to find that unmute button. Yeah, just probably second Marcus's point around this is these regional strategies are never intended to take away local decision making, only to inform them, to support you to go into these decisions, which are particularly difficult at the moment with your eyes wide open. And hopefully by endorsing the strategy, you're endorsing Nukuora to support your officers around the region to work together around an evidence-based approach to facilities provision. So we're right behind them with that. We provide a little bit of investment each year to support that evidence-based approach. And some of the work that's been undertaken to date includes the regional indoor courts study and sports field study that Nukuora led on behalf of the region in recent years. So those are the sorts of outputs you can see from working more collaboratively across the region about how we optimise the facilities network.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Kia ora. Thank you all. We'll hand over to our members now. He pātai tō ngā mema. Does any member have a question? We'll go with Councillor Lewis, Councillor Shaw, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you for coming in and presenting. It's a great report. In the recommendations, we're choosing not to support going forward with Pororua as a regional stadium. I just want to know from the report, which I didn't get into that detail, what was the considerations why that was going to be put forward for a regional grandstand or park?
So the report was done by RSL, an independent consultant, so it was their recommendation, and we did debate over whether we wanted to put it in there. But their decision for putting it in there was around their feedback from the stakeholders that they'd engaged with, so around Wellington Rugby and Phoenix, and where they are currently based. And that Porirua at the moment is the most developed mid-sized stadium in the region, which wouldn't need too much investment to go to the next level. It doesn't say that it's the best placed long-term to be at, but at this stage, that's where it is. And that's the recommendation from RSL that's been put into this report.
Councillor Shaw?
Thanks for the report. It's excellent, really well written, and lots of really good stuff in there. In it, it identifies areas of high deprivation as being Forth, the Hutt Valley, Taita, Pomari, Stokes Valley, and parts of Nainai, which has happened to be the ward of myself and Councillor Mitchell. Just, I guess, I'm interested in, is there any recommendation specifically about the level of investment in spaces like that? What does that actually mean to us? Does it mean that we're going to get a bigger chunk of the pie, or is that going to be your recommendation to us to invest more money in those areas?
Again, it's not our decision. So we certainly run the steering group, which is a collection of all of the councils. So if something like that was put in front of it, the idea of this is more to look at sub-regional and above facilities. So local facilities would always come back to local areas to make that determination around what's right for them. So if there's a sub-regional facility in an area such as Nainai and Taita, which there currently is, Te Nainai Pool and Walter Nash, then certainly we would advocate for access and use for those communities as cheaply as possible. So it is around cost and accessibility and how we manage that within those spaces. That's what we would advocate for.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw, for your question. What I will add from a council point of view is that we do already invest in those communities in various ways, whether it's from the facilities that are up around those areas, the community facilitators that sit with my teams, the work that we do, to support community-led development and activation across those communities. One of the things that's been really pleasing to see in my time at council is the strength of the collaboration that we have with Nukuora and other sports players, sports and rec players around the city. And that shows itself up for the community in lots of different ways. But over the last 6 months particularly, we've done some really, really good things together, activating Walter Nash, for example, around things like the Kaumatua Games, 2 lots of welcoming weeks. Those sorts of activations we think actually do a lot for building community connection and cohesion as well.
Councillor Brown.
I have a question, but the Kaumatua Games was absolutely excellent. I think the Kaumatua across the region were on a high for weeks after that, so more of that. And in the report, it does talk about wanting to use more multi-sport in the bigger buildings and less of discrete buildings, so that would certainly fit with Walter Nash, how we could make that more multi-sport than what it is. My question is that we are talking a lot broadly as a council about where we overlap, but in your view, and I think it's partly in the report, what are the gaps for the region and something for us to think about as a council, understanding what you see as the gaps are for the region?
Certainly in the report it does detail some of that, and from the early analysis work done around sports fields and indoor courts. And all of them note that right across the region we're reasonably well served. So for most activities we are well served. There are enough facilities there. It does talk about some of them, or a lot of them, being nearing the end of their life or needing maintenance or some improvements to do that. And like I said, we've applauded the work that council's been going along in that regard. It notes a gap around indoor court provision in Kapiti, and they're working on an indoor space out there. It talks about lack of green fields in Wellington because of lack of space. So some of that's being done by improving the facilities there that they've currently got, but also pushing some of the activities out towards some of the other cities as well on improving those spaces. And then it talks about that mid-sized stadia. So there's been a lot of talk around that, around those sort of commercial games and high performance, but that mid-sized stadium is the other gap that's there at the moment. Making our facilities more accessible to everybody is the part that we also hold dear, around getting everybody access to activity within their rohi, where they live.
Thank you for your question, Deputy Mayor Brown. What I will add to that is, from a council point of view, an officer's point of view, recognised a couple of other opportunities to improve or increase physical wellbeing, physical activation across the city. Yes, there is absolutely something around accessibility and the ability for our families to be able to get to and from these places safely. There's absolutely something in there in terms of affordability as well, the ability for our families to be able to pay subscriptions for children, tamariki, mokopuna, to participate. And there's also something in there around the growing diversity of our city, and the extent that the physical activations across our various diverse communities look quite different now than what they did 20 years ago. So we think the facilities, the places, the services, the supports that council provides needs to be responsive to all of those changing needs. And the work that we have underway around our sports policy is the way that we'll work our way through what those choices are and bring those options back to you for decision.
Councillor Barrett.
Kia ora, Adrian. Lovely to see you again, Marcus. I think the last time we saw each other was standing outside the old Nine-Eye Pool. Yes, we were. Look, great report. Thank you so much. Just asking, with the formation of the new Age and Accessibility Subcommittee, will this be something that we will be included in future conversations, or what is happening, please?
I can respond to that if you like. Would welcome the opportunity, Councillor Barrett, to come and speak with the Age and Accessibility Committee, firstly about the strategy and the opportunities that the committee and the advisory groups, once it's established, might see in terms of interacting and input, and go from there.
Thank you. I just did have one question myself with regards to the content of the report, and there are some really interesting tables in there about top 5, I think it's top 10 actually, activity behaviours, which notably do not include organised sport. I mean, some of it may, swimming as mentioned may include some, but I think it's probably mostly recreational. And then noting that there's a separate table of organised sports, sport by sport. So the most popular individual organised sport is football, which doesn't make the top 10 of the other ones. But what I couldn't see, and excuse me if I overlooked it, was a figure for organised sport, full stop. How many people participate in organised sport or an organised sport rather than an individual one? Do we know what that figure is and where it sits in the table?
I'm looking.
Sports New Zealand might have
I'm looking towards Zanta to see if she has that information. But you're correct. It does break them down by individual sports in those tables rather than as all organised sport. And I'm not sure how easy that is to do, because the definition around some of that organised sport is quite different. Whether cycling is organised sport or whether it's track cycling, and that sort of stuff. So that's my take. But Zanta might be able to add some more to that.
We can certainly find out. Would you like a regional or a Hutt City view of participants?
Well, the tables here offer all of New Zealand, Wellington region and each city. So I really was wondering where it sits in that top 10 activity behaviours. Where does organised sport sit? I assume it is in the top 10 as a grouping. So it was really to do with that. So if you could follow up with any information on that, that would be most appreciated. Thank you. The other question I did have, Marcus, as Adrian mentioned, this is a timely report for us. We have some difficult conversations in front of us about service provision of our council that may involve consolidation of some recreational facilities. I was wondering, because I also heard you say, I think, that your focus was kind of sub-regional and above, and that you would leave local facilities to councils, but I wondered if you thought there was a role to you for your organisation to play in terms of looking across the region and regional provision of local facilities and just kind of measurements that we might be able to compare ourselves to. If you see any role for your organisation in that discussion.
We can certainly provide some advice at a local level, but that decision making would be sit with local councils. We would encourage them to use the principles that are in there anyway. So the principles are the same whether they're at a local level or a sub-regional level. So there's principles in there around accessibility, around partnership, around use. So we do encourage councils to use that framework as a starting point, regardless. But it wouldn't go to the regional steering group to make a decision. I suppose we would encourage local officers, and we'd work alongside local officers to help support whatever work they're doing.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions? If not, I'll thank you all for the work that's gone into the report and for bringing it before us today. And I will move the motion on page 10 that the committee endorses the Wellington Regional Spaces and Places Strategy attached as Appendix 1 to the report, noting the following caveats. A, in recommendation 2.1.1, the collaborative decision-making framework and process will provide advice, and Hutt City Council will retain self-determination around its own spaces and places. And B, recommendation 2.1.5, at this time, Council does not support regional collaboration and potential investment to upgrade Porirua Park to provide a regional mid-sized stadium. Mawai e tautoko. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Tonga Grant, thank you. Is there any discussion? Councillor Brown.
Thank you. I just want to endorse that it's a really great framework for us going forward, particularly in difficult times where we really do have to start making difficult decisions. So it's a really good framework for us. But at a sort of micro level, just a huge congratulations on that Kaumātua Day. It really, for several of them, I was there talking to them, that it brought back activities that they hadn't done in years, that feeling of competitiveness, that feeling of being in a team, of being able to compete, but in a fun way. It really boosted a lot of people who hadn't had that for years. So a huge well done.
Thank you. Any further? Councillor Lewis.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Niku Ora for the report. It is aspirational. And why I say aspirational, we would all love to see everything you've suggested in there applied to every city. But knowing what we've budgeted for our green assets and our sports and facilities over the next 10 years, yeah, it was really aspirational. So we need to look hard. We've got a big, hard choice going forward with what we invest in. So thank you. It is very good.
Any further comments? No. In that case, I will now put the motion, which has been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Ka whakapuaki au, kua mana te mōtini, I declare the motion carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 6, assets review update and Maungaraki Hall lease. It's on page 40 of the agenda, and there's some information also in a public excluded agenda. I will ask Andrea Blackshaw, Director of Neighbourhoods and Communities, to speak to the item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll respond initially to our two public speakers, who I think are not with us anymore, but maybe watching online. So Alan and James, who came in to talk about the various assets, and I would also thank them for coming in. Officers don't take any pleasure in putting forward assets for divestment. Many of us live here and have used these facilities, but this is the approach that Council is choosing to take to manage the financial challenges we have. So it's a process we need to work through. When we met with Rotary in September, they were not offering to take over ownership of the conservatory. And so I think now today we've heard that they are, and I think that we would be happy to work with them on something by the end of March to see if something can be put together there. In terms of the Hardwick Smith Lounge, I think officers had proposed a deadline of the end of this financial year, so the end of June, which I think is in the appendix but not in the main paper, which probably wasn't helpful for them. We had proposed that again. I think James had said end of March, and we'd be happy to work with them on what can be put in place. Probably the thing that we will need to consider is that when Council made this decision in the assets review, it was on the basis that the divestment would happen if organisations could show that they can manage the ongoing costs and not come back to Council for more funding or more officer support. And so, that's beyond the transfer of the asset. And that was for two reasons. One is that these buildings still sit on reserves, and so we're still accountable for the safety of them. So we would have to give them leases, and if the building's on our land, then we are responsible for the safety of those buildings. So we have to ensure that they're being kept in a safe condition. The other reason is, though, in spite of the best intentions of groups, that often these projects are not successful because of the amount of money that you have to raise. The reason we have the problem with assets is because of the cost of assets. And we've got a lot of community groups coming to us now and saying they can't afford their assets. So for community groups to then start from scratch to raise the money to take on an asset is a very big ask. Great to hear that Rotary may already have some funds, so that's great. And so often those conversations, while well intended, later on the groups do come back and seek more support from council to complete these projects or move these projects forward. So that's why council decided that these groups must demonstrate that they can manage those costs, and that's what we would be looking for by the end of March, a plan from them that shows us that they can manage these costs, and we would be happy to work with them on that basis. Just for clarity, yes, council can divest buildings to community groups, and yes, council can have buildings that are either private or run by community groups on council land. We have more than 100 leases for that already, and that's all of our sports clubs, Scouts, Guides, Plunket. All of those community groups have a lease to be on reserve land. Just more broadly, I would say, that council has just recently adopted its target operating model, and one of the key tactics in that, one of the key approaches, is the rationalisation of assets, and that's to help us manage a really significant financial challenge. In the target operating model report, it showed very clearly the impact of holding on to assets, particularly around depreciation, but also around the costs, the running costs and then renewals. So that is currently a very significant cost for council. When you break it down to one building at a time, it probably doesn't seem quite as much, but overall, council has decided it needs to reduce its stock of assets to manage this financial challenge. I think what we are learning, the assets review also said that we would divest assets, and we identified a small number of assets to have conversations around. I think we were working with 9. We've managed to, in the last 2 years, actually divest ourselves of 1, and we are still in conversations about 4 others. Those conversations going between 2 years and 3 years so far. And so there is a question about how long council's prepared to allow for groups to demonstrate that they can take on an asset. I think that's probably something that we'll look at if we're going to seriously look at rationalisation of assets as a tactic to manage the financial challenges we have. We'll have to put a much tighter process around it that provides a deadline for people so they know it's coming, and also makes sure that 2 or 3 years down the road, we actually haven't achieved any of the savings that we've actually already booked in, which is the position we're sitting in at the moment. So I think that's probably been a really good learning for us through the first few that we've done, and if we're going to do more, then we'll look at putting a bit of a tighter process around it. We have with us today is Arthur Nelson from Parks and Reserves team and Joe Sluman from the Assets team, and they are able to answer questions on both of those buildings that we've talked about, but also on the other matters that are in this paper. I think we can probably just move to questions.
Okay, so noting there are many officers in the room to answer your questions, and there are a few elements to this paper, including those 2 assets that we heard about in public comment, but not restricted to those. So we'll open up for questions. Does any member have a question? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, and thank you, Andrea. Yeah, I can understand the dilemma that officers are going through with this divestment process. And you've mentioned about tightening up for, the process on the side of council. I just want to know what prior information perhaps the groups get in advance. Have they got a process that we could help them get through, to pre-warn them, this is everything you've got to have to go forward? Is there anything like that we're already doing?
Yes, we do. We provide, in some cases, very extensive information around the costs and the condition of buildings and projected costs and about our requirements. So we have given some quite detailed information, maybe not in all cases. What we haven't done is given a deadline necessarily. So I think that's probably the bit that we would look at.
Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, absolutely accepting the advice that from Andrea that our baseline should be that they own the buildings going forward. and can demonstrate that they have the wherewithal to cater for ongoing costs. But on that basis, is there any scope for some of the money we have earmarked for demolition, and I'm thinking of particularly the building that the Rotarians are interested in, for a portion of that money to be used by Rotary to do what they need to do to get the building into a position where they could take over ownership?
That would be a decision for council to make. I guess I would say, though, that we are facing a significant financial challenge, and so any money that's spent on assets that are not deemed strategic and not deemed necessary is money that isn't spent on other assets that might be a high priority.
Agree, but we are budgeting that money for demolition, so it's money we would have to find anyway.
Yes, but if it's, yes.
Councillor Brown.
Just following up on what you said, Simon, would that be the case then, that we would have to put the money aside for the hundreds of assets that we have earmarked and potentially have that funding sitting there to, that they all get a portion of the demolition costs, because there is going to be group after group after group coming? This is going to happen every time. This is not an exception to the rule. So I just would question, would we need to get that sized up, what that would look like in terms of funding? Because there is hundreds on the list.
That's not part of the current decision. The current decision was they are divested and there's no further funding or support. So the current decision, it wouldn't happen under that, and probably we're not in a position to say what the overall cost would be because we don't know which buildings we're talking about at the moment.
Councillor Parkin.
I'm just contemplating the same thought, that we have an issue that we are budgeting money for demolition, but we are also potentially wasting an asset if we don't help the community to pick it back up. I also get what Deputy Mayor Kerry Brown is saying in terms of there is some potential cost there, and one of those costs is that if the restoration remediation work falls over, then that cost still comes back to council. I'm wondering if officers have considered the idea that we keep that money set aside for demolition, but if the community shows that they've managed to maintain that asset and get it back up to a working standard that is now no longer needs demolition, that we actually then provide them the demolition money as a recognition of the money that they have saved council and the work that they've done.
I think what we're the conversation we're having is revisiting what was agreed in the asset review. And so I think probably not asset by asset is probably not the way to do that. That's probably a conversation that we'll be having in the future when we get into the target operating model and we decide what the process is for that broader piece of work. So I think that would be a good conversation to have then. But currently we're working to the current decision that's been made.
If I could just ask one more follow-up, I think we're getting a little bit sidetracked. One more follow-up question about demolition money. Is it common practice that these assets that are surrendered to council, the cost of demolition falls back on council anyway, i.e. we always have the liability for demolition for assets on our land?
Final liability, yes. And if the assets are not ours, if people walk away from assets on our land, we would also have that liability because we need to make it safe.
Councillor Stellinger, Councillor Dyer.
Yeah, I had a similar question. So just a bit of a follow-up on that. Do we have examples where that's happened? You know, the community groups a group has walked away from an asset on our reserve land and we have had to fund the demolition ourselves.
I am aware of, in the past, a couple of cases where that's happened. I won't cite them today because I'm not completely sure, but I'll just pass to Arthur, who might have more experience in that.
Recently, we demolished Torito, which was a squash club, privately owned. So yes, we do it, and we do it a lot. I think that we need to also be quite clear here that the money that might be saved or put aside for demolition is not just for demolition of that building, it's for 3 buildings over there, including reinstatement, according to Heritage New Zealand requirement of landscape. The other issue is that whilst you could invest money or a portion of the demolition money to remediate a structure, the community who's taken over the structure would still need to find the depreciation costs and the insurance costs for that piece of that building. So, for instance, if we look at the building over here, the Gibbs Watson glass house, currently that book value is about $29,000, $30,000, which means it's got a very low depreciation cost and a very low insurance cost. If you then invest $1 million in it, it becomes a much higher one, which would be similar to Petonia Rec, which is around about 180,000 depreciation costs and about 30,000 in terms of insurance costs. So the community takeover would still need to find the money to fund that depreciation and renewal. Otherwise, we've been in exactly the same position as we are now, only 10 years, 15 years down the track. So while there is money put aside for it, demolition and then reinstatement of landscape means with no ongoing depreciation costs, no ongoing insurance costs. I think, as Andrea alluded to, if you're reading the TOM, the depreciation cost council $106 million a year. And that is primarily all these assets that we're trying to renew at various points, which we really just do not have the facility or the ability to renew. So I think whatever decisions councillors make in this situation, that there needs to be an understanding that whilst we might use money to invest, there will be additional cost generated after that. And in particular, the Gibbs Watson is a high structure. It would require work safe notice every time we went in to paint it, every time we went in to do anything on it. So again, the maintenance and ongoing maintenance would need to be entirely with the communities group. Else again, we've got ongoing costs. There are other considerations that need to be addressed. One is wind resistance. If you take out all the glass and just leave a roof on there, there would need to be an engineering assessment on whether it would tolerate heavy winds, and we've had a fair few of those recently. And only a week or so ago, it's taken down a hell of a lot of trees, and you can see the evidence of that in the back. So there would need to be a number of reports done by whoever's taken it and whoever's invested in it to make sure that we as council were comfortable with what they were proposing. So it's not a simple equation. Demolition money, put it back in. There's quite a bit more to it than that. And although I'm not 100% familiar, Joe probably knows Hardwick Smith better than I, it would be a similar principle.
Thank you, Arthur. I've got Councillor Dyer up next, and followed by Councillor Parker and Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. Just a process question around how we're going to handle the appendix that's in public excluded but doesn't have any recommendations there.
We will be moving into public excluded so we can discuss, noting there's some items that are only in that paper there.
Will that be before you move recommendations?
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Parkin.
Thank you. So I'm just trying to flesh out my thoughts on the costs that we are imposing that that the community meets. I understand the need for insurance, although one could say that the value of the insurance of the asset that the community has to actually insure may not need to be the same amount that we are currently required to do from a council point of view. And I understand the need for the community to take over the renewal work. That makes perfect sense. Why are we getting the community to pay for depreciation on an asset that they haven't actually even built yet, and that is part of our accounting if they are ensuring that the renewals are done? Why are we then charging a 50-year term for something that it just doesn't? It feels like we are setting the bar too high for a community group to be able to do, so that it fails, so that we go to demolition.
So I go back to what I said before. So talking about insurance, it's on public land. So there needs to be public liability insurance and a whole bunch of other insurances so people don't get hurt for a start. Second thing, in terms of the depreciation, as I've said, we know that is near its end of life, not only because, we've had a condition assessment on it, but because the cost of it is now to about $29,000, where it would have been initially a heck of a lot more than that. as soon as we invest more money in it, if we're going to avoid the same advanced state of disrepair that we've got over there, somebody needs to have funding to do a renewal. Now, if council is happy to take the depreciation that would require the renewal, all well and good. But if council wants to avoid that depreciation cost, then that would need to go onto the community organisation. Otherwise, as I say, in another 20, 25 years, you'd have the same problem. Same structure, same poor standard, and the same problem.
Just as a clarifying question, Arthur, what you're really saying is that not that we will be charging depreciation to a community organisation, that the depreciation transfers with ownership of the building to the ownership of the owners of the building as an ongoing cost to them and not to us. It's no longer our asset.
That's correct.
So we're handing the buildings over to a community. The building is already depreciated. The community group is showing that they have the ability to refresh that asset to the full amount, and then we're worried about them not being able to do it again in 20 years' time. Is that correct?
The process for divestment would be that we would arrange the transfer with them, and then we would establish a lease for the reserve land that they're on. And that's an annual lease. And once they're on that land, we would require them to keep the building to a certain standard so that it could be safe. How they manage to do that is completely up to them. I think what we're suggesting is that if they don't take a good asset management approach to it, that eventually the building will need renewals and they won't be able to afford it. And that's when often people come back to council. So I think we're saying that's why we need them to demonstrate that they can manage all the costs, because we need to see they're going to take a good asset management approach to it.
I'm just going to go through in the order I already had here. Sorry, and Councillor Barrett's been waiting.
No problem. My question's been answered. Thank you.
We can come back to you then, Councillor Brown.
Thank you. Arthur, looking at assets that are already on land that groups have, like a rugby, like bowls, I've been working with a few of them and they are very much struggling with these same issues that they own, and they are indicating they're not sure how long they can carry on like this, even though they are well structured fundraising groups. In your view, how much of a challenge is it going to be for community organisations to do this from ground zero when these established groups are really struggling now and indicating they may not be able to go on for much longer themselves in that facility they have?
So, unfortunately, I don't know the detail of the situation, but again, I'd say a general thing. Right now, one of the points, as Andrew said, is the Tom clearly talks about disposal of buildings, and we're doing that to reduce our own depreciation costs. Because if we keep them, then we keep the $106 million. So, you know, it's not easy for anyone out there. I mean, if council have got to get rid of its buildings because it can't afford them anymore, then I'm sure that you know, the organisations out there and the clubs out there are suffering from exactly the same issues. Insurance claims going up with changes in weather. I suppose the question is, how much does council want to subsidise and support those groups? Well, it's already in itself under a pretty restrictive financial arrangement.
Councillor Shaw.
Reference to page 41, paragraph, sorry, just putting up now, 8 and 9, around leases. It's quite a concern that of the 140 active leases, an estimate suggests that 30% are non-compliant, and of those that are compliant, there's 85% that need some work. Does that not put us at quite a bit of risk from a council perspective?
A lot of the leases are not particularly high risk. Some leases are. I mean, in previous places I've worked, there's indoor firing ranges. I mean, obviously they're quite risky. But club rooms and the like are probably not hugely risky. It's more of a legal risk, really, if there's something being undertaken on a site that we're not familiar with or there's a problem with. But generally speaking, most leases and community leases will be relatively low risk.
I would just add to that as well that was a problem that was identified during the asset review, that we did not have a centralised or very formal or consistent approach to asset management, or including the management of leases. And so that's something that the team is now working its way through, and you'll see a number of leases now are starting to come through council for renewals.
Councillor Young.
Kia ora, thank you. Just following up from a question from Deputy Mayor Brown on page 41, number 6, just recognising that kind of tension around rationalisation of assets in the asset review that's taken place, that was before I hit the stable, but also that clash of meeting community needs as well. And I'm kind of got this lingering question, I think it was alluded to in terms of buildings from Councillor Lewis's question, but for me, I'm kind of wondering how proactive have we been in terms of having a broader community kōrero about the needs and wants and hopes for our people, because I'm recognising with not just these conversations, but some of the other ones that have been floating around, that we seem to be having like an idea of divestment comes up, and then maybe 2-3 years later, that idea has been socialised enough that a community group's picked it up. And I'm wondering how proactive are we being to have, I guess, those honest kōrero with our groups, because I think it does take quite a bit of time for communities to kind of, piece it together and kind of work out how that could look. But I also think in Aotearoa we have probably quite limited models of how it has been done successfully as well. So I'm just really mindful of like how proactive are we actually being in that space.
I think we've been quite proactive with the small number that we've done to date. And with most of them, there's been a party with a particular interest. And so that party, we've worked with that party right from the start. We've done a broader expression of interest on a couple of them as well, to see whether there are any other interested parties. I think going forward under the TOM, that's something that we would also look at, because there may be assets that are a bit different and don't have just one group with a particular interest. So we would need to look at that.
Sorry, just to follow up on that, I guess I'm also really mindful of, is there space and room for us to be having that conversation with the wider community, not just an expression of interest? I'm just really mindful that some of these are resources for the whole community. So, how are we trying to include that conversation for our wider communities who often will not engage unless they're part of that? Like, I think our model is kind of narrow in that sense that we're only thinking about who's currently using, but the opportunity is also who could be using it. So I guess I'm really mindful of that.
So as part of the current long-term plan, we consulted on the assets review, and so consulted the general public around it, but also ran a couple of sessions for people who either run or use assets to come, and they were really well attended. We had, I think, over 40 people at both of them, and so we did endeavour to get good engagement around that, and again with the TOM going forward, we could look at that.
Councillor Stellinger and then Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just following up on a comment that I noted from James Scott, and it was just anecdotal comments he passed on about demand for halls in relation to Belmont Domain and also up Kelson. So my question that I noted was, I think we're always going to get these anecdotal kind of comments when we propose taking something away, but do we have any broader observations or knowledge about demand versus supply for these type of facilities?
Yes, we do, and a lot of that information came forward when we did the asset review. I think there was a workshop with councillors where we provided a lot of data on the cost and use of facilities. We also now have Bookable, our digital booking system, which enables us to get much more information and good data. So we do. I think one of the principles of the asset review is optimisation of existing assets. And at the time we discussed that would mean that everybody wouldn't necessarily get what they wanted. There'll be a lot of shared spaces and people might have to move to different times to accommodate things. But the approach that council would take to managing the cost of assets was to optimise existing and to only strategically invest in new and to divest where it was appropriate.
just to clarify, thanks for that response, but from that work, do we believe there is sufficient capacity, even with downsizing what we have now?
There is sufficient capacity to, actually not everywhere and not for every activity. There are some activities, pickleball is a good example, where we're struggling to get capacity for the growing demand for that. So there are some activities, new activities that we aren't able to accommodate well. There are activities where they've been offered a shared space and they've not wanted that. They've wanted their own space. We've not been able to meet everybody's needs, but we do have capacity across the network as long as people are flexible.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, the budget alignment in page 41 on bullet point 2, last long-term plan was for 2 million over 10 years to manage these assets in the green space. How much have we used of that? Have we used any of it on the assets we're working on now to divest? And is it enough, basically? So there's two questions there.
Sorry, can you just remind me which page, which point you're on?
41, it talks about, as part of the long-term plan 24-34, we agreed to put 2 million over 10 years for maintenance and renewals of built and green assets, and agreed on an approach that would enable officers to manage these assets in line with allocated budgets.
So the $2 million isn't funding, it's a gap. We under budgeted by $2 million, and we're trying to, with this approach, we're trying to fill that gap. We've not had much success on the divestment front yet, but we have had some success with increasing the use of our facilities, increasing cost recovery. So you'll remember we put up cost recovery for the use of our community facilities and also for our land leases at the last LTP. That is contributing to the budget gap. And there are more people using our facilities because of the bookable system, we think, and that's contributing as well. So on a couple of fronts, we have managed to bridge it a little bit. We've not done so well on the divestment front.
Councillor Dyer.
A specific question on the Mangaraki Hall lease, but probably bigger as well for other assets as we look at divestment. I know there's been some conversations about allowing third-party providers of spaces to use our bookable system. Is that something that's being looked at for Mangaraki Hall or the wider assets as we go bigger?
Thank you. On the Mangaraki Hall lease, I believe the lease proposes that the school, as the leaseholder, will take care of the bookings. I think we did talk about bookable as an option, but that was a different option to the school maintaining the lease. So I think if they weren't full leaseholders, then bookable is another option that we could have pursued.
In our conversations around these halls, we have talked about the option of continuing to use bookable, and it's whether it works for the group that we are talking to.
Thank you. I'll just come back to a couple of questions of my own, and they relate, just coming back to the topic of leases in general. And this paper outlines a few aspects of our lease review of leases that have taken us a bit by surprise. I think one, that we haven't been collecting power where power costs are owing to us. Two, and perhaps more significant, that some organisations have been subleasing their premises. I was just curious about the subleasing aspect. Do leases we provide to community groups, all or some of them, allow for the subleasing of the facilities that are leased to them?
So a lease would normally allow a lessee to sublease as long as that lessee spoke to council about that and council agreed. That's usually part of the lease. What you can't do, and this is where the problem is under the Reserves Act, you can't issue a community lease to a community group and then that community group sublease to a business or a commercial group. That's not allowed under the Act. So in some of those areas, we need to, and again, there's some work on this in the paper, I think, from what I recollect. So where there has been a community lease subleasing to a commercial lessee, then obviously we need to address that. One, because obviously cost recovery isn't what it should be, and two, because it's not in line with the Reserves Act, and that goes back to some of the issues we talked about before. So as I say, this is the first time that the leases are having a really good review, and as I say, the leases coordinators looking into these quite closely now.
So I guess I would question then, in terms of our process and our leases and the way they are written, is it clear that they can't be subleased to a commercial operator?
There's a lot of different leases. Normally, there's a blanket clause that says you can't sublease unless you talk to council. So if you came back to council and said, I incidentally want to sublease to this commercial people, we would say, no, you can't. Unfortunately, I think some organisations, and I don't think they do it on purpose, I think they just assume that they can pretty much sublease to who they like without necessarily coming back to council. And certainly a few that we've had recently have subleased commercially, but haven't come back to council to talk about a sublease. So, we're in the process of putting those things right as well.
Thank you. And just noting that a lot of this has come to the light because we have employed a fixed term officer to look into these leases. Once that fixed term role is finished, how will we monitor these leases and make sure that the same kind of things aren't popping up over time in future?
The reason that was fixed term is because as part of the asset review, we were going to fund it through some of the increased revenue that was coming in because the leases were being updated, and that has happened. But now I think we've proven there's a case for this ongoing, and we'll address that as part of the target operating model conversations.
Thank you. Are there any more questions on the public part of this paper, Councillor Shaw?
Yeah, it's in reference to Mangaraki Hall, page 45. I'm curious to know, is our lease with Ministry of Education or is it with the school committee?
Presuming we can answer that in the public part of the paper. Yeah, it would be directly with the school. Yep.
Because in there sits potential for other schools to do similar, if that's is that something that we've looked at?
I can't think of any other situations where we have a school. Actually, Belmont Hall is probably a good example, actually. That the school is the primary user of the hall. Belmont Hall is not leased to the school in the same situation, though. But yeah, it's certainly an option if an asset lease came up.
Okay, if there's no further questions on the public papers here, I move that the public be excluded from the following parts of the proceedings of this meeting, namely assets review update and Mangaraki Hall lease public excluded appendices for commercial activities and commercial negotiation reasons. Do I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Stallinger. Is there any debate? I will now put the motion that has been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no.